Let me take you back in time. The year is 2012. We're 2 years into the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, and things in the Conservative Party aren't looking that good. David Cameron is having to fight multiple wars on multiple fronts from his own party members, desperate to try and ensure that they have the loudest voices to be heard. But overall, things were not really at the time looking that well. Remember, Britain at that time was still desperately trying to recover from the 2008 financial crash. And of course, the Conservatives at that point were still very happily and getting away with it by blaming Labour for all their problems. But then, of course, if you were a political journalist at that time or someone who was looking at politics, you'll be looking at this group called the ERG. Of course, we all know them now as the European Research Group, and you could see the problems that they were themselves creating for Cameron, levelling the threat that if they did not get a referendum on leaving the European Union, then they would walk away and join UKIP. And of course, you've got to remember, at 2012, UKIP would be at its almost zenith, almost at that point. So in this time period, at this time, any new MPs desperate to try and sort of raise their voice were, well, not listened to. That is then, of course, until a lot of people started to receive an invitation to a book launch by not one MP, but a group of MPs. And it's not unusual for an MP to write a book, but for a group of MPs to write a book, well, that's pretty unusual. Most importantly, all these MPs at that time were pretty new and were desperate to get their point across. And that led to Britannia Unchained. But you might ask, what happened to some of these authors of Britannia Unchained, and who were these authors? And to be honest, if you know already about this book, you know who exactly we're going to be talking about. But if you don't know about this book, here's who wrote it, and then, well, here's what's in it. So the first on this long list of MPs who contributed to this book were, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng, Priti Patel, Dominic Raab, Chris Skidmore, and of course, Elizabeth Truss, prior to the days of rebranding herself as Liz Truss. But this was essentially the book at the time. It even had, as you can see at the top here, a headline from the guy who ran Tesco's, a big Conservative Party donor. So if he was backing these new lot of appeared to be maverick new MPs, and of course this Dominic Raab fellow had been described at the time as a rising star in the Conservative movement and potentially even a future Prime Minister. And of course, each and every single one of them has a story of, well, disasters after disasters, leading into this, that not one author of Britannia Unchained has ever achieved what they set out to do, or even achieved very much. Instead, many of them have left complete and absolute economic disaster, followed by a complete and absolute burning wreck that is the current Conservative Party. So, before we go diving into the who's who and what happened and where they are now, well, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And of course, as always, thank you very much to those people who do help and support the channel. And of course, down below, there are links to the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club as well. So let's get cracking, shall we? Because I think the first one on this list needs to be Priti Patel. Because after this, and of course, after the skirmishes of 2016, Patel had managed to climb herself into the position of Home Secretary. And at that point, her big concern was these small boats that were coming across that were sort of starting to upset, shall we say, the likes of Nigel Farage. And of course, fearing a potential revival of UKIP or reform being led by Nigel Farage, Patel went into absolute overdrive mode, making promises that she was going to stop these boats, a promise that sounds very, very familiar. And of course, over her time in the Home Office, she did not achieve that. If anything, these boat crossings only went up. And that was really the end of Priti Patel, seen as an absolute failure in the Home Office when she tried to put her hat or potential hat into the ring, certainly to replace Boris Johnson. No one took her seriously. And of course, she also has her own bullying claims as well. So where is she now? Well, she's still on the backbenches, desperately trying to cling onto a new path to power. Indeed, it seems she's tied herself to Michael Gove at this point and the new National Conservatism movement, funded not by 55 Tufton Street. No, instead, it's brought to you by the same people who fund CPAC over in America. Needless to say, I don't think we have potentially seen the last of Priti Patel. But who knows what the future may bring. But at the moment, she's sitting on the backbenches, being known as probably a massive failure of a Home Secretary. So let's move on to a double act. Yes, Kwasi Kwarteng and, of course, Elizabeth Truss, or there's now she likes to be called Liz Truss. These two, of course, after the downfall of Boris Johnson, rocketed to stardom. They were, Liz Truss was going to be the leader of this new, unconventional government that was going to bring in all these fantastic ideas that were going to really unleash Britain. And you know what? She's going to bring along her pal, Kwasi Kwarteng, who's going to be the economist guy, who's going to make sure that Britain's economy booms like never before. And of course, well, we all know what happened. They pretty much crashed the UK economy, leading to a massive rise in inflation by saying that they were going to do all these unfunded tax cuts, which was going to lead to more massive borrowing. And of course, there was going to be no more tax rises to cover this amount of borrowing, meaning how was the government going to cover this? Which lead to, of course, the gilt market being sent into an absolute spiral. And of course, the pensions industry in the UK is very much in that. And from what we at least know from some inside sources, a couple of the UK's biggest pension companies were literally an hour away from becoming bankrupt if the Bank of England had not stepped in. And at that point, well, both Liz and Kwasi had to go. Of course, we all know Liz Truss, the shortest serving Prime Minister in UK history. But where are these two now? Well, Kwasi Kwarteng is probably in a bit of an internal battle against Liz Truss. He's desperately trying to distance himself from Liz Truss as much as possible. He's still there on the backbenches. And I suspect maybe, just like Priti Patel, maybe we haven't heard the last of him. But certainly seen as someone, as a potential talent to bring forward to the front benches, absolutely not. No one in their right mind would ever put Kwasi Kwarteng in charge of the Treasury again after the disaster that he oversaw. And then you've got Liz Truss, or Elizabeth Truss, as her name is on the front of the book. Well, after her very much disastrous premiership, almost crashing the UK economy and destroying the UK pension industry, she has pretty much remained unrepentant, arguing that what she was doing is right and everything that she had done would only have worked if only it hadn't been the work of those evil left wokies and those deep statuses that were working secretly in the background against her. Like I say, if you want a perfect example of just how unrepentant she is, like I say, go watch the Freedom Lecture or the Margaret Thatcher Lecture from from an American think tank, the Heritage Foundation. It's not a good watch, like I say, prepare to lose a lot of brain cells and come away feeling incredibly angry from it. I know, I certainly did. So this brings us on to the recent, shall we say, downfall of one Dominic Raab. Like we said already originally in our sort of obituary of Dominic Raab's political career, this new bullying allegation that has sort of got to him has certainly rendered him now forever politically useless, and even potentially at the next general election is on course to lose his seat to the Liberal Democrats, a party back in 2012 who he deemed the most responsible for Britain's bad economic position. And so a rising star crashed to earth by, once again, according to him, the woke civil service, and uttering in a new age of where the civil servants can act independently to get rid of ministers by spuriously spewing bullying claims at them. Of course, despite his very, very much argument in the Times article, he never actually has provided, and no one arguing for this, that what happened to him was bad, has actually provided any evidence that civil servants have gone against the wishes of any of his ideas or stuff that he wanted to do. And yet, all you want to do to describe Dominic Raab, well, have a look at the bullying report itself. It does not paint him in a very good picture. And those, of course, are probably the most highest profile, shall we say, casualties, the names, the big names behind Britannia Unchained. And then, of course, there was another one. Chris Skidmore, of all people. Chris Skidmore, still an MP. Surprisingly, very pro net zero. For a Tory, that is. And of course, he was removed from his position by Boris Johnson in the great 2020 reshuffle, even himself going on to put in a letter to try and oust Boris Johnson. Chris Skidmore is still around. But surprisingly, something that a lot of people may not realize is that there is not one mention in this book of leaving the European Union. Not one. Now, I have to wonder if this had been written maybe in 2013 instead of 2012, might have Brexit made its way in there? Who knows? But Chris Skidmore, surprisingly, even sort of in 2018, infamously said, if the Conservative Party cannot stop talking about Brexit, then the Conservative Party is doomed. And yet, tomorrow on Monday, we are going to be seeing a big 3-hour debate on the failures of Brexit. I'm going to be watching it in my live stream. Like I say, I invite you to come along and watch along with me. I think it's going to be quite fun. It's due to kick off 4:30 UK time. I will start streaming just a little bit earlier than that, probably about 4:20. But again, come along and join. But yeah, an interesting lot, to say the least. But Britannia Unchained, lessons for growth and prosperity. Well, certainly when Elizabeth Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng tried to put those lessons into action, didn't really suit the UK economy. And of course, infamously, the opening of this book says that the UK workers are the laziest in the world because they're too much protected by all these worker rights and HR regulations. Needless to say, the authors of Britannia Unchained have pretty much almost, bar Chris Skidmore, come to a very, very poor and political end, and are not considered to be the brightest bulbs in the Conservative Party anymore. Indeed, is there any future for any of them? Well, bar Chris Skidmore, I would argue that certainly Priti Patel and Kwasi Kwarteng probably do some very, very long stints on the backbenches to try and sort of regain some street cred in the smallest before they can ever be brought back. And if they are brought back, it will not be in a senior cabinet position. It will probably be a junior cabinet position to try and actually prove, did they actually have any talent to begin with. And of course, we all know the truth. None of them had any talent at all. Britannia Unchained is a widely derided book by many economists and many trade experts who have looked at what has been written in this book. And that has been its legacy, that the authors haven't delivered growth and prosperity. Instead, they've delivered economic disaster and, well, a massive decrease in the living standards in the UK. So that's hardly delivering growth and prosperity. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please do remember to, click on the like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, do leave a comment down below of maybe your favorite moment of any of these people's downfall below. Like I say, this was a quick run through some of these people's downfalls. And of course, we didn't get to mention all, shall we say, of their highlights. Of course, Dominic Raab infamously suggesting, oh, we didn't realize how important the Calais-Dover crossing really was. So, as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, we'll see you all next time.